Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions on all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures in order for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments both socially and politically that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we write thought pieces every other Sunday, and we have one scheduled to drop this upcoming Sunday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. If it is the case that you're looking for listening alternatives, well, we're available on 10 different podcast platforms for your listening leisure, and we provided you access to the links in the description down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Hello everyone, welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis, and this week our topic of discussion is mental health. Now, for those of you who've read the description, we're going to be talking about the ways that we bounce back from our shortfalls. And unfortunately for us, we've been conditioned to react to the way that we show up in different spaces. If it's lesser than what we wanted or lesser than what we expected, we react adversely because we have this perfectionistic culture. We have this culture that really makes it so that mistakes are very harshly judged and very harshly criticized. So we all make an effort to be perfect or to seem perfect or to lead seemingly perfect lives. And the issue with this perfectionism cycle is that it really keeps us from really embracing and delving deep into self-discovery, because a lot of self-discovery comes from learning from our mistakes. But if we've embraced this culture and if we feel pressured to be perfect and we really try to embody perfection in the way that we show up in different spaces, in the conversations that we carry, in the way that we even frame the experiences that we've had to ourselves, if we're unable to acknowledge our own mistakes and our own, failures and shortfalls, then it's very hard to learn with that schema. So this is truly a criticism of the perfectionistic schema. I think it keeps us from learning about ourselves. It keeps us from deriving learning from our experiences because we're so afraid of being lesser than because we're not perfect. Well, newsflash, we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. No one is perfect. And that's the human condition. I mean, I think that it was El Dorado that said to err is human to err is human. And that is so true, but we don't err just for nothing. The mistakes we make our journeys more fulfilling. It makes our journeys more enriching, and it really informs our sense of self and the ways that we are evolving and developing as well. So all of that to say, for me Personally, I'm fairly confident and comfortable letting you know that I've made a plethora of mistakes in my past. I'm probably even currently making multiple mistakes now. And I strongly anticipate and expect that despite the learning that I'm trying to derive from every moment, that I am going to make mistakes in the future because I am human, right? And I want everyone to sort of embrace the freedom of being human by discarding this schema and this framework of perfectionism that keeps us from learning from our shortfalls, embracing the process of self-discovery, which I feel is the parallel and sort of the aligning schema to perfectionism. You choose perfectionism and you limit your growth and your capacity to develop because you can't see and own your mistakes. If you embrace self-discovery, then you have to shed the idea that you're perfect, and without shame or guilt, like without judgment of yourself or even acknowledging or accepting judgment from others, because it's realistic to embrace a schema of self-discovery, recognizing that perfectionism is an ideal that is elusive and that none of us is going to attain. And so now I'm going to inject a bit of a personal anecdote myself, because this kind of lends to the conversation of perfectionism and of self-discovery. Is I've been reflecting very much on the price of ignorance. So I mentioned in a couple of videos, I was raised in the middle of nowhere. I was raised under a rock, and my worldview was fairly limited. So I had a very limited sense of how the world operated outside of my little box. And within my little box, a lot of the beliefs that I carried, there was no issue, right? Because I only really interacted with people that reinforced and confirmed this belief. But as I grew and as I expanded and as I was interacting with different people, you start to see how it's important that you embrace the learning and the experiences from these expanding interactions and allow them to inform your beliefs. Otherwise, you recognize that there's a price to ignorance. There's a price that you pay when you don't know any better. So one of these such beliefs is the belief that anyone who had hurt me, who had committed a slight towards me, I never really took personally, because I always assumed that people who slighted others were bleeding souls. And it was important for me, as I was taught, to have compassion for bleeding souls, to not internalize the pain that they've inflicted on me, because they were hurting and they needed compassion and they needed me to recognize the deeper underlying issue behind their behavior. And I was always taught to demarcate between loving the person even if you don't love the behavior. When I stepped out into the real world, when I stepped outside of that box that I was kind of raised in, I realized how few people separated behavior from individuality, behavior from identity. And I'm like, well, they're two different things. Like, someone can be one way, but their behavior shows up adversely for very different reasons. So it's important that you can have an issue with the behavior, you can address the behavior, but you don't frame or identify someone by their behavior, because you don't know where that behavior in and of itself is coming from. It's important to love the person even if you're not in total agreement with the behavior. So this was the belief that I carried for the large majority of my life. And then newsflash is almost embarrassing, but some slights are very personal. They're done intentionally, and they're not done from people who have bleeding hearts, right? Not everyone who inflicts injury or harm has a bleeding heart. They're not all bleeding souls. Some people very happily and merrily inflict harm on others. And this is something that this was a very bitter pill for me to swallow, to assume that someone was oriented in such a way where they found pleasure in harming others. And it wasn't because they were hurting. It was just sort of their own self-orientation. And while I think that this is a very skewed and distorted orientation, it's the real world, right? It's the world that we live in. And I was only hurting myself and exposing myself in precarious and very harmful situations because I just couldn't imagine that someone would want to inflict injury simply because they saw an opportunity to do so. So as a result of this, I had a lot of shortfalls in relation to this, right? So a lot of my shortfalls involved relationships and building relationships with individuals where compassion was sort of seen as weakness, where vulnerability was seen as weakness and as attributes to be exploited. And I had to adjust my worldview in order to better support and protect myself from the kinds of people who really found pleasure in kind of wreaking havoc and creating chaos, and who weren't in fact bleeding souls who were crying out for help. And I talk about this because when it comes to beliefs around our shortfalls, it takes a lot of time, of reflection, and of introspection to recognize why we keep falling in the same pit, or why we keep, feeling as though we're like living the same movie over and over again. And we have to really try to find the belief that is driving the behaviors that create settings where we're showing up in certain ways and exposing ourselves to certain injuries and to harm. And it's important that we figure out what belief needs correcting so that we can break cycles, so that we can adjust our behaviors and we can realign ourselves based on the beliefs that we now carry in such a way where we're no longer exposing ourselves to the same forms of harm and to the types of individuals who see the way that we show up and see our own orientation as an opportunity to inflict injury or harm. And that's just one example. I mean, there's so many different examples of how this might translate. Each of us has our own beliefs about the way the world works. And with every belief comes, a reward and a consequence. With every belief comes a reward and a consequence. And I thought that was important to reiterate, because when you recognize that there's consequences to believing certain things, that beliefs carry blind spots, and oftentimes it is our experiences and our shortfalls that give us a sense of what those blind spots are. But if we're not looking to understand, like, why is this happening? Like, what belief am I carrying that carries also this consequence, so that I can adjust the belief to kind of adjust the different types of consequences that I'm experiencing, so that I'm no longer exposing myself to this kind of harm. So we have to go down this rabbit hole. We have to do this kind of reflecting so that we can elevate, right? And we can vibrate at a higher level and not continuously find ourselves cycling through the same issue, even if it's with different people. And if you're that way, if you find that you're having sort of the same rigmarole, it doesn't matter who the personality is, you're kind of cycling through the same issue. Typically that means that there's a belief that you're carrying that has a blind spot, and you're being exposed to the blind spots. You're being provided with opportunities to recognize, well, this belief carries a consequence that makes it so that you're susceptible to this kind of injury. And I think that framing it that way just makes it more manageable. It gives us a little bit more control by way of how we can manage ourselves and revise our beliefs to support ourselves in our growth and development moving forward, and not allow ourselves to get jaded by the experiences that take place in life. And I like to talk about this because growth doesn't come when you try to be perfect. Because when you try to be perfect, you have a hard time acknowledging your mistakes and acknowledging the ways that, you showed up in the ways that you didn't show up exactly the way that you ought to have. Growth comes from when we acknowledge our mistakes. We acknowledge the fact that we could have done things differently if we had this new set of information and this new knowledge. And it frees us to develop and to really extract as much learning as we can from our lives, from our lived experiences. I mentioned in my first video this week that learning doesn't just happen within the four walls of an academic institution. It happens every single day, with every single interaction, with every single person that we meet on our own individual journeys. If we're stuck in this frame of perfectionism, it's really hard to see, to take hold of the learning that these interactions, that these experiences, and that these people bring into our lives. Now, when it comes to sort of embracing this process of self-discovery, to acknowledging our mistakes, acknowledging our shortfalls, this doesn't need to be wildly eventful. It doesn't need to be a monumental moment. It can be a quiet moment to yourself, right? Where you're celebrating yourself, you're celebrating your learning and the growth that you now have as a byproduct of acknowledging some of the mistakes and some of the blind spots that come with the beliefs that you've carried. And you're also celebrating the fact that you've given yourself permission to learn from your shortfalls, to learn from your failures, and to grow from those failures and from those shortfalls, and not limiting your growth by embracing sort of a schema of perfectionism. All right, so 3 tips that I have for you, and 3 reasons really that I have that support my argument that it's better to sort of discard this perfectionistic model and to move into self-discovery, a self-discovery model. One is it provides you an opportunity to acknowledge your mistakes, to embrace your mistakes, and to self-correct. So you don't need someone else to tell you how you need to show up moving forward. You can inform your decision on how you move forward as a byproduct of that shortfall, as a byproduct of that mistake, yourself independently. You can be in the driver's seat of your own development and of your own evolution when you embrace this self-discovery model. And remember, every experience tells us a little bit about ourselves as well as the worlds that we live in. The second reason is it enables you to address the beliefs and the worldviews that you carry that make it so that you're susceptible to fall into these experiences over and over again. And so when you yourself are the one who is addressing and acknowledging the beliefs and the worldviews that you carry, and maybe even some of the values and thought patterns that you carry, it gives you an opportunity to pivot, to make the shifts, to make the changes, to make the revisions required. And with every shift, with every pivot, with every change, with every reorientation, you're setting yourself up for success to show up differently in the world. And the more you show up differently in the world, the more you now are giving yourself an opportunity to experience new things. And lastly, embracing a self-discovery schema allows you to be the master of your ego. And we all want to master our ego. We don't want our egos running the show. And for many of us, our egos have been running the show for far too long. And if you run within a perfectionistic model, if you're unable to acknowledge the mistakes you make, if you're unable to take accountability for the fact that, you messed up in a certain arena, that's typically the ego showing up, right? If you can't take accountability, if you think that you're above reproach, if you have sort of a grandiose air to you, you think you're above everyone, you're above it all, if there's arrogance sort of on display, and all of us can be these things at different moments in time, all of that means that your ego is your master, right? And it keeps you from aligning to your highest self when you operate within this schema, right? So perfectionism is really just not good for us. It's not good for us by way of the growth that we can derive from learning from our experiences, especially learning from our shortfalls. It keeps the ego in the driver's seat. It keeps us from reflecting on our beliefs and our worldviews and deciding like what shifts and changes need to be made, what revisions need to be made so that we can show up differently, so that we can better align with our highest selves as well. And I think that it's really important that we recognize the benefit to ourselves when we acknowledge and take the learning that comes from the mistakes that we're all going to inevitably make. So that's it for our topic today. But before you sign off, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that we've gone live with our Facebook Live events. So we will be hosting events at minimum twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future. We have published our thematic calendar so that you get a sense of the theme of each of the live events throughout the year. And we've given you the opportunity to register at any point in time. Our registration links are on our website, so definitely be sure to check that out, to RSVP, and I look forward to seeing you in one of our sessions. Now, these sessions are paid events, but that's because we're facilitating these sessions in such a way where we're creating solidarity, we're building community, a game changer community, and also providing critical thinking, life skills, and soft skills that will enable you to better derive more meaning and fulfillment out of life. And who doesn't want that? And if you do see yourself participating in our community on an ongoing basis, then might I suggest our package plan. So we do offer package plans that give you unlimited access to all of our live events at a discount, and also over and above the live events, it gives you access to our webinars and the workshops that we plan on hosting throughout the year, largely focused on different areas of self-mastery. So if any of that appeals to you, definitely check out our website, check out our live events, check out our membership plans, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. We'll talk to you soon.